You are muted, but the fact that it says recording in progress tells me you agree. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody who's joining us. My name is Jen Barr. I am a social science and public health researcher, currently working independently in sanitation, and I'm based in Denver, Colorado, in the US. We have a fantastic panel today on histories of global sanitation, with scholars and researchers representing all over the world. I'll introduce them in a moment, I'll be introducing them in a moment. But much of the forum has been focusing on the current lives of sanitation workers. But these things are changing, right? Any situation is very dynamic, and there's a lot of change, and we can learn and there's so much to learn and think through and question about the history of this work and of these spaces. Understanding how these situations change will help. Understanding how these situations change really gives us insight into the social, political, and economic underpinnings of these changes. So we have again a group of panelists from around the world. Mr. John Uwa is Doctor, I'm not sure, sorry. John Uwa is a cultural archivist and academic researcher in the Department of English at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Hariprasad is a PhD student and project staff at IIT Bombay. He was trained in environmental studies and resource management and is currently looking at the issues around water, health, and sanitation related issues in rural and urban areas of Kerala. Kerala is a state in the southwestern part of India. Currently, he is joining us from that same state. I also forgot to mention that John will be talking about the histories and politics of sanitary policies in Nigeria through pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial. We also have Joe Beale with us, representing a team that is working in Pakistan, and they're looking at more recent history from the 90s until now. Joe is a professor at the London School of Economics City Centre. Daniel Gerling is joining us from South Dakota this morning in the US. He got his PhD in American Studies from the University of Texas, where he wrote about the history of shit in the US during the Progressive Era. He's an associate professor at Augustana University in Sioux Falls, where he teaches a class on poop and writes mostly about sanitary imperialism and 19th century sanitarians in the US. And he'll be talking about George Waring, who is a celebrity sanitarian in the 19th century. Each of our speakers have 5 minutes to talk. I will be reminding you gently or not so gently to try to keep to that. And most of the time we'll be here for discussion, so hold on to your questions, and I think we're going to have a really dynamic panel. So first up, John, would you like to start us off?
Okay, yes, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. As announced, I'm going to be talking about the histories and politics of sanitary policies from pre-colonial to post-colonial Nigeria. I have basically done a couple of research, collecting data to see the changing manifestation of sanitary policies in Nigeria and how these policies have come to shape urban life, social life, and to also see that beyond the policies, certain perceptions and cultural practices have come to shape politics, the policies of sanitary policies in Nigeria from the date. So I'll be going back and forth in history to see how these changes and cultural underpinning have come to shape the policies on sanitary policies and how it has also come to engender politics in it. So apart from the natural inclination of Nigerians and humans generally to manage their waste or to engage in good housekeeping for personal convenience, sanitary policies in Nigeria are greatly influenced by the triad of perception, urbanization, and capitalism. This triad, time will fail me to explain this, but just as much as possible, keep to time. This triad creates a contrary with existing culture of waste management, but both individually and collectively, to create conflict and politics in the management of waste in Nigeria. While the need to manage waste in an exploding population like ours, talking about 200 million Nigerians, is inevitable. The development and execution of waste management policy has greatly been shaped by what Professor Newell has called the cultural politics of death. That is, the cultural politics of death. It is implied that the whole exercise of waste management since colonial Nigeria has practically been hovering around bulk passing, blame game, insincerity, and exploitation. In other words, the policies and politics of waste management in Nigeria has delineated the population into hierarchies and categories of people who are shifting the responsibility of keeping a clean environment across the various categories and tagging themselves in terms of clean and dirty, and therefore suggesting that the certain persons are responsible for the poor state of sanitary conditions in the country. For example, the poor blame the rich and the government for being insensitive to the deplorable sanitary conditions of residential areas occupied by low-income earners. The government and the rich people blame the poor for generating too many waste due to their poor sanitary orientation. And sanitary workers who are poorly paid vent their anger on the people by refusing to dispose waste, which sometimes leads to a pile of waste around the city centers and residential areas. And sometimes these sanitary workers even embark on strike in protest. Others blame the poor waste management on rural-urban migration and tag migrants who come from rural centers to occupy in search of greener pastures in urban centers as dirty and as bringing rural habits to city centers. And even more ironic, waste managers are branded as epitome of debt due to the nature of their job, and this creates some level of tension between these workers and the public. Unfortunately, policymakers do not recognize the huge industry waste management has come to signify in developed economies of the world. And where they do, they only pay lip services to such innovations of developing viable waste management industry. The government partnership with private sector in the management of waste has repeatedly collapsed due to government's inability to keep the terms of its partnership, particularly as it relates to funding. Even if the public is meant to pay for these services, the government still do not meet up to their responsibility of paying private sectors. So you will see most of the data I collected in the course of my research leading to the information on sanitation in this study were collected over a period of 4 years while I was working as a researcher on a European Research Council funded project at Yale University funded project titled The Cultural Politics of Dirt in Africa. The present study keys into the ambitious qualitative framework of that study to show how locally situated understanding of waste management since pre-colonial Nigeria has come to shape contemporary understanding of waste and policies around waste management in modern Nigeria. To that extent, I have looked at this study from theory perspective, the pre-colonial. And the pre-colonial period has to do with collecting and looking at how, before the colonial masters came, the British and the Portuguese, the way people managed it and how people are tagged and how people are tagged in terms of waste management. While there are no scholarship on this period, we have relied on folklore, songs, stories, and words and interviews of very old persons who have told me that before the white people came, their people had a way of managing their death. For example, defecation. Before the colonial masters came, the Africans used to defecate in holes, which they call shalanga. So you don't need sewage managers and all of that to do that. But occasionally, when they want to clean their environment, they constitute themselves into small group, and those who do not involve are actually shamed or punished or fined somehow. But during the colonial era, all of this changed. The colonial masters came with their own hybrid, with their own structure and a civilization that is thought to be more civilized. And when they came, of course, the natural process to pass out defecation or to manage waste came to confront them. So the British colonizers established the indirect rule policy. You see, the indirect rule policy was a system of management where the local system is retained. Okay, my time is almost up.
It is past.
Okay. Well, I will stop here and I will just take the other parts of it in my questions. Thank you very much. Otherwise, I was going to talk about the waste policies like war against indiscipline, which the military system introduced, and then empower. I was going to talk about Agbeku. Very interesting conversation where waste managers are empowered and how they went into the field and took advantages of their position as waste managers. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Harry, do you want to bring up your slides? You are our next presenter. And for those of you who are watching, feel free to hold on to the questions until we're through with our presenters.
Yeah. Shall I start?
Go for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Thank you. It's a great opportunity to be here and speak at the Sanitation Workers Conference 2021. Myself, Hariprasad, I'm working at IIT Bombay as a project staff and also a PhD candidate. So I'll share my screen. I have around 5 to 6 minutes of a presentation ready. Yeah. Am I audible and visible, and my screens are also visible? Hello, Jen?
Sorry, what?
Am I audible and visible, and also my slides are visible?
Yep, everything's good.
Yeah. So I'll be speaking about evolution of sanitation work and workers, mainly the fecal sludge management in Alleppey town. This is a project which I'm doing along with my professor N.C. Narayanan and also my colleague Rohit Joseph. So the background of the larger project is Brown Gold project. So it's led by IDS Sussex, and it's happening in Ghana, India, Ethiopia, and Nepal. And the very idea is to reimagine human excrete as brown gold, something which is we can make use of into a circular economy. So as a first step, we have looked at the history of fecal sludge management in the small town of Alleppey. So we could know that there was a local body started in Alleppey. From 1895, there was a town improvement committee, and from till 1972, it was a formal job, and it was dry latrines in the town. So in 1895, it was decided that the dry latrines will be cleaned daily by the manual scavengers. Until 1970s, it went on. In 1972, the Kerala government has stopped or banned the deployment of people for manual scavenging, and then the transition started. So this was from formal to informal. So formally, the fecal sludge management was carried out by the municipality. Then after the banning, there was a transition from the dry latrines to the flush toilets. So there was no fecal sludge management or the manual scavengers after that. So it went from formal to informal, means there was private service providers who helped. So they were manual septage cleaners. After 1980s, till 1980s, there was problem until problem in converting because it was too slow. There was financial constraints, other constraints. So the manual septage cleaners and vacuum suckers, or honeysuckers, we say, that was after 2008. So it has completely become an informality or illegality in Alleppey town, the work of fecal waste management. So we'll start with manual scavenging. As I mentioned, that 1890s was the starting where the people were deployed, and it was a caste-based occupation. So in India, manual scavengers were mostly from the lower caste, Dalits, and in Alleppey also, it was only scheduled caste, wherever they come from. They come from Kerala or from the neighboring state of Tamil Nadu. Most of them were uneducated, and they're also not from upper caste. So they were also deployed, or they were by the municipal administration, they were put into the separate colonies. So there was a social exclusion at the beginning itself that we can see in the colonies. Still, those colonies exist in the town, but they are mingling like any other people. But till 1970s, there was a discrimination, and there was a communist movement also happening in Kerala, and there was a call for dignified work life since 1930s, late 1930s. But the continuous struggle, they were not allowed to enter the municipal hall, and the count salary which they get in their hand, also put footwears in the office. They also asked for increased salary and other benefits. So the continuous struggles over the years, 1950s, 60s, and 70s, they got better wages, and their labor rights were, the municipal officers were ready to address their issues and also to accept them, even though society was little hesitant later also. So the discrimination happened in the sense that the children from those colonies, their manual scavengers children, were also facing different kinds of discrimination. But some of the discriminations were hidden, or they didn't understood at that point of time, when their colleagues or the teachers were making fun of them. So while having a study, we could understand that they understand the importance of, or they understand those were the discriminative words or the acts. And then, as I mentioned, it was transition. So it took another 20 years for transitioning from the dry latrines to the flush toilets. Till the issue was that community dry latrines, it was difficult to convert, and there is a lot of people using the community dry latrines. And the many state union government initiatives, slum development project, urban basic services for poor, and other projects helped in converting the dry latrines to the flush toilets. UNICEF also worked from 1982 to 86, and also around 1,700 toilets, individual latrines were constructed. So the current state is there is manual septic tank cleaners. After the dry latrines disappeared, there is only manual septic tank cleaners. So they were mostly migrants from Tamil Nadu, came for cleaning the fecal waste and other sweeping activities for a temple festival. So when the temple festival happens for the 30 days, they will be coming along with their families from the neighboring state. And after the program is over, their families go back, and those men stay back and do the cleaning of septage tank in the neighboring areas. So throughout Kerala, we could see that in different districts, they're there in different numbers. So when after 2008, the vacuum suckers came in with mechanized lorries and trucks. So this reduced their work days, or the working opportunities, by 50%, as they say. And they're not registered with any government system. They are private manual septic tank cleaners, and they complete the work in 2 hours. They dig a pit next to the septic tank. They convert this to the pit and then close the pit. So they most of the tanks, septic tank in the area were a ring septic tank rather than the proper the mechanized the proper system. So they don't cycle. So this is the cycle and their work too. So still they are the only left out. I mean, the people who are using cycles for going for their work. And the behind these cycles, you can see the temple which they are working at. And also these are their equipments for carrying out the work. And now latest is the vacuum suckers. They charge from 6,000 to 7,000, and they around 85 service providers are in and around the district. And they have a mechanized way of sucking. In many parts of the world, we know there is vacuum suckers or called honeysuckers. They transport in a truck, but they dispose it in the open as there is no fecal sludge treatment plant in the town. So then it becomes an illegality. So here the focus is informality and illegality, because when the same septic tank of the court or the district court or the police station is cleaned, it's no longer an illegal action, because they are freely, because this is a necessity, it's an emergency service. So when the septic tank is cleaned by the vacuum suckers from a police station, it's no longer an illegality. Otherwise they are caught, they are beaten up, they are arrested, they are fined, everything is there. So they are mostly invisible. They operate from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m. but their close friends know that they're working on this, and they also face discrimination through the social media for the work they are doing. So one of the person was put a photo, and there was a derogatory comment by one of his friends that I know the work that you are doing. You are disposing the fecal matter. So those kind of discrimination exists, but there is people from all caste, religion, age is there in the work, but no female workers in this mechanized way of fecal waste collection and disposal in the open. So this is the thank you. This is the main points I would like to share. It's informality, from formality to informality, then informality plus illegality. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if you can stop sharing your screen, I will queue up.
Yeah.
I will bring up Jobs. So we are moving from the south of India up to Pakistan. And I should have had this open already, sorry. My sincere apologies, I should have. Here we go. All right. Is that coming through?
Yep, that's great. Thanks very much, Jen. I'm going to talk about work that is ongoing and is part of an interdisciplinary research project that involves engineers, architects, urban planners, and social scientists. It's funded by the British Academy, and in this particular presentation, I'm drawing on the work from Pakistan, although the project also covers Ethiopia. It builds on 2 PhDs, both awarded in 1997. One by Mansoor Ali, who did his PhD at Weddick at Loughborough University, and one by me in geography at LSE. He was working on Karachi, I was working on Faisalabad, and we assisted each other at the time, him in relation to technology and me in relation to social science method. Although we knew that robust longitudinal research would not be possible, partly because of the time constraints and the nature of the work, This was complicated much more by COVID-19 pandemic, which has meant that we weren't even able to identify some of the key informants we knew we'd be able to link up with and the communities where we had contacts. But we were very fortunate to have, as part of the team, Haris Gazda and Hussein Buxmala from the Collective for Social Science Research in Karachi, and I know Hussein is part of this session. And their involvement was actually very innovative and useful, because whereas Mansour and I did our research, both in terms of interviews and ethnographic research focused on the workplace, Haris and Hussein focused on the communities in which waste workers live. The research project looked at 3 areas of change: technological, institutional, and governance and social change. And here I'm going to be talking about social change. And in this respect, we looked at some of the social markers of ethnicity, caste, and religion, of those traditionally associated with municipal sweeping services. Now, people who handle waste are generally known in Pakistan as sweepers. They're also known by a range of very much more pejorative terms like chura for the Punjabi Christians, and involve also low caste Hindus, particularly in Karachi.
So, sorry, you have to tell me when to move the slides.
Can you move the slide now? Thanks. Yes, that's the one. With apologies to Beswada Wilson, who told us that looking at photographs wasn't great. These actually are photographs from 25 years ago. The bottom right is me doing participant observation on rubbish dump with both sanitation and waste workers in Faisalabad. The others are drawn from Mansour's work in Karachi. I think there's 3 things that have happened since in the 25 years. First, the population of the cities have grown dramatically. Second, the volume of waste and the variety of waste has grown and changed. And third, the municipal authorities have undergone significant reform. In Karachi, there's different arrangements over the 7 districts of the city, but a lot involve outsourcing to private operators, including a private Chinese company. And the result has been an increase in worker precarity. In Faisalabad, the approach has been slightly different. Under the aegis of the Punjab state government, there has been corporatization with the establishment of a state-owned company, not-for-profit company. In this context, the traditional municipal sweepers, who are mostly Punjabi Christians, kept their jobs, but they don't have the same secure conditions of service. So what hasn't changed? In Faisalabad, the Punjabi Christians, referred to as chura from their low caste status as agricultural workers in the past, continue to be primarily associated with work in waste. And in Karachi, Hindu scheduled castes of various ethnicities, Gujarati, Kutchi, and Mawari, also predominate. In both cities, there's also the recognition that people belonging to other categories, notably Changa, Dinda, and now Muslim Rajput, who are deemed to be relatively new converts to Islam, but with pre-existing identity markers of ethnicity and caste, are also involved in waste work. So, last slide, please, Jen. What has changed? Well, in Karachi, the new Muslims, or recently converted Muslims, and recent can be quite a long time ago, have muscled in on municipal waste work, as have Afghan refugees. The very large recycling work, the Kabari work in Karachi, is also dominated by Afghan refugees. In Faisalabad, the Christians are holding on to sweeping and sanitation work, but increasingly the new Muslims, the Changas and Deendars, are entering the labor force, and they are the ones who've come to dominate the recycling sector. What hope for the next 25 years? Technological development could have made the kinds of changes that Hari was talking about in Kerala, but these have been confined to secondary collection, i.e. the waste from transit points to landfill or dump sites. The major technological changes and organizational shifts have quietly presumed the existence of a large pool of unskilled work or workers willing to take on this dirty work. Households like the flexibility of drawing on this community for private informal work, and politicians use them as casual workers and as vote banks. For their part, the municipal sweepers exercise agency by using their religious identity and so-called contaminating properties to protect their access to work where possible. And this is increasingly important in a cosmopolitan and market-dominated setting like Karachi. What about changes in social identity? Well, Islam espouses egalitarian principles, and yet in Pakistan, in different waves, it has sanctioned a belief system similar to untouchability, and this is still actively practiced. The greatest indicator of this is that despite increased involvement of Muslims in waste work, still after 25 years, it's only Punjabi Christians and low-caste Hindus who do the sanitation work. There is a boundary between those who wield the broom, who sweep the waste and involve themselves with the disposal of dry waste, purportedly less defiling. And these are the jobs that Muslims compete for and increasingly get. And those engaged in gutter work, the clearing of drains, sewer lines, and manholes. These are exclusively the former traditional municipal sweepers. And this wet-dry boundary is constructed, maintained, and breached in various ways. Last point, there is some upward mobility, not through waste work, that it remains in others' hands. In Faisalabad, Punjabi Christians put huge emphasis on education, and none want their children to be involved in waste work. But it's not easy to get other jobs. And there are many stories that abound of educated Punjabi Christians applying for office jobs in public or private sector organizations and being told that they should apply for cleaning jobs. In Karachi, much more diversification, not so much in terms of assets, but through jobs in the service sector, where opportunities are opening up in domestic work and other linked contaminating activities such as healthcare, personal care, and beauty parlors. These jobs do hold prospects of upward mobility, but for this to happen, and it does sometimes happen, the association with untouchability has to be broken.
Joe, you are out of time.
Thanks.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm also coming to realize that it is very difficult to subtly signal to people when their time is up in virtual format. I am next up, but thank you so much. And I think I can speak for most of the audience where I wish I could listen to all of you for an hour, but that would be impractical. For Sanitation Workers Forum 2021. We can always do a marathon version next year. While I'm talking, I am bringing up Daniel's talk. And share. I think you can see my whole application, which I didn't mean to do. There we go. Go for it. And you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Huge thanks to Dr. Barr for allowing me to be part of this panel, and thank you to my co-presenters. I'm impressed with your research, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. If you could change the slide, Jen. So as somebody trained as a US historian, I think of George Waring when I think of sanitation workers. My research is primarily on the cultural and social history of shit in the United States from about 1860 to 1920. That's the period when the US transitioned from cesspits and scavengers to indoor plumbing and centralized sewer systems. And I'd be glad to discuss the scavenger system that preceded the sewer systems later, if you like. But this is why I find Colonel Waring so fascinating. He's emblematic of some of the mammoth changes underway in the US during this time, which included sewering American cities, ending the scavenger system of excrement recovery, and making sanitation a linchpin of American imperialism as well. So, okay, slide, Jen. Thank you. Briefly, Waring began his career as the head drainage engineer for Central Park in New York, and this is just before the Civil War. In the 1870s, here he is seen in Willowdell Arch in Central Park, and there's a picture of Willowdell Arch as it is now. And there's Frederick Law Olmsted, who was in charge of creating Central Park, essentially, of designing it. In the 1870s, he took a career detour into writing horse novels. So yes, that's novels about horses, before becoming the most famous sanitarian engineer in the country, traveling from city to city, designing and installing his sewer systems, before being hired by New York City as its head of street cleaning. In 1898, when the US was at war with Spain, Waring was sent to Havana to design his sewer system for the city to stem waves of yellow fever that really prevented Havana from being a first-rate port city. He was there for about a month or so before he caught yellow fever himself and died. So I learned of Waring early in my dissertation research, before I knew about contemporary sanitation celebrities like Jack Sim, Bindeshwar Pathak, and so on. And in the US, we really don't speak of sanitation much. So I was surprised to hear, very surprised that there was a sanitation celebrity in New York in the 19th century. But of course, it does make sense. They saved thousands of lives, millions if we delay their innovations and labor a few decades. Okay, and slide, Jen. Waring's career also became emblematic for what our society wouldn't value for almost a century. First of all, Waring was an environmentalist. He saw his job as a sanitarian, one that included looking after the Earth's appearance and the Earth itself. As such, his sewering model involved what we call a separate sewer system that you see on the right here, rather than a combined sewer system. For cost reasons, most cities ended up adopting the combined system, which sent stormwater and wastewater together to their destination. It might have been a river or an ocean, and then eventually in the 20th century, it went to a wastewater treatment plant. Waring, however, championed a separate sewer system that allowed the wastewater to go where it needed to go, and for stormwater to do the same. Cities with combined sewer systems like New York have sewage overflows. That's raw sewage flowing into rivers and oceans every time it rains more than 1/4 of an inch. Cities with separate systems don't need to treat stormwater and can more efficiently recycle the shit. And then slide. When he took over the New York street cleaning position in the mid-1890s, New York streets were pretty disgusting, as you can see here. They're ankle high in horse manure. They were littered with rotting animal carcasses. It was so bad that the automobile, which was just being invented, was marketed as a solution to address the rampant pollution of the cities. Waring organized a crew of white wings, who were mostly Black and immigrant street sweepers, decked out in all white to represent the cleanliness they'd impose on the city. A year after he began the street cleaning department, the difference was considerable. 2.5 million pounds of daily horse shit were cleaned from the city, and he sold it to farmers as fertilizer. Other organic garbage was sent to a location to be boiled and rendered for fertilizer as well. Ashes, another serious pollutant, were taken to ash heaps like the one that we read about in The Great Gatsby, if you've read that. And then slide, please. Thank you. So here we see the white angels here, the white wings in their uniforms. So in other words, Waring instituted a recycling system 25 years before recycling was even a word. Some historians look negatively on Waring as his showmanship, his national attention, his financial success weighed against his lack of expertise. He wasn't properly trained in this, he just learned it. But this showmanship was instrumental in gaining attention and accolades for his sanitation work in New York, as he organized a parade for them, for the sanitation workers, a year after they'd begun their work. And the difference was palpable. Decades after Waring's death, sewage wasn't recycled, but was fed into rivers. Garbage wasn't recycled, but was sent to enormous trash heaps. Not until almost a century later was sewage broadly seen once again as an asset or a valuable fertilizer. Not until 80 years after his death was recycling considered a virtue instead of a practice by those who couldn't afford to waste. So Waring stands today as a figure who got quite a bit right. He also represents the class and race difference between the administrators and the workers. And finally, his showmanship serves as a model that these past 20 years have shown to be a success. Sanitation movements are made by the collective labor of individual workers, but a celebrity face for the movement seems to help bring public attention to the cause when taboos prevent us from speaking openly about sanitation. So Jen, if you could skip ahead actually 2 slides. Of a video there from Edison from 1903, but I think we'll go to this poem. This is a tribute poem written by Helen Gray Cohn shortly after Waring's death. And I think it's significant because it indicates the degree of heroism ascribed to him, but also because it's steeped in this progressive era racism that reflected the division of sanitation workers, with immigrants and minorities doing all the work while the white leader is treated like this mythical hero. So his poem reads, it's just called Waring. Brave was that earliest song of our English race, of the dragon slayer who died by the dragon's breath. Glad of his clear deeds done, he laughed in the eyes of death, facing the stony face. Brave by the blue North Sea, nor thou less brave, thou fever slayer, yet slain by the breath aboard. Spirit that forthright flashed like the straight blade Saxon sword, soldier who died to save. So I'll end with that then.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. We're gonna move into the question and answer session. I'm going to give the presenters the first right to ask a question of each other. Would any of you all like to ask one of your fellow panelists a question? Go for it, Daniel.
Thank you. This question is for Hari. I'm interested in a few things, but primarily there was a movie that came out in India a few years ago. I think it's called Ekpram Katha, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly.
Toilet, Ekpram Katha, or Toilet, a Love Story.
Toilet, a Love Story, thank you. And I wonder if that really made a social difference in India. I know it was a huge hit from what I heard, with a very prominent Bollywood star. But did it make a difference, do you think?
I don't know. Not in Kerala, which doesn't speak Hindi, and Kerala Malayalam is the tongue. I didn't see that movie particularly, I should say. I haven't seen that, but I used to watch Hindi movies. This particular movie I haven't seen, but I think it only made some headlines in some, it was a discussion, but I don't think it has made much impact, because I haven't heard, the situation is still more or less the same before and after the movie. It's not a movie can change the situation, which is caste-based, and it's a governance issue, priority to the fecal waste management. That's not, I don't think.
If you don't mind me jumping in, I've seen the movie and have done a lot of work in it. My research has been in India. I did not enjoy the movie. I'm just gonna throw out there. It's very much like a propaganda tool for the current party, the BJP. I don't think it shaped it. I don't necessarily think it fundamentally changed people's minds. I think it kind of reinforced pre-existing narratives. Would be my short answer on that.
Fascinating. I showed my class, and they also felt like this is maybe sponsored by Prime Minister Modi as a propaganda film. So I'm not sure if that's true or not. But
I know Akshay Kumar and Modi are good friends. Akshay Kumar also came, the star of the movie, also came and visited Sulabh and Bindeshwar Pathak. So there's a connection there.
Jen, there is
If
a
my book
question.
ever gets published, you can read the chapter when he came to visit Sulabh. Sorry, what were we saying here?
Yeah, there's a question by Hussain. He's asking whether the migrant workers from Tamil Nadu are Dalits only or OBC to religious minorities. Can you tell? So whoever I met was from scheduled caste. So I don't think even OBC people from Tamil Nadu are in for this job. So all these people are relatives also. They came from the same district, same town, and all around 25 people are there in the town in nearby areas. So all were scheduled caste people, and the mostly when I looked at the history of manual scavenging, there were also Hindus who converted into Christianity because of this Dalit issue. That there were converted Christians. They were also doing this. So even if they convert into Christianity, also they were doing this manual scavenging work. Many of them were having Christian names, but they were converted from Hinduism. So some of them were having, they were Hindus also. So it's as of now, during the preliminary study, I could understand that it is a scheduled caste people. Yes.
Joe, I'm going to give you the opportunity to ask a question since you've got your hand raised.
Thanks, Jen. It was an association really of the picture that Daniel showed of the white angels looking quite organized, if not militarized, and what John was going to talk about under the military period. And I wondered if sometimes when you want to get a sanitation system going, if sort of top-down organization just has to happen, and to give John the opportunity to say a bit more about that militarized system.
John, I'm not hearing you. Are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, I can hear you. Yeah, I'm here. Can you?
All right, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good. Now, thank you very much for prompting that question. I was going to talk about what during the military regime in Nigeria, like I said, it's all about blame. Rather than getting your job done, you blame people for the way things are. So the government at that time came and thought that Nigerians were indisciplined. That is why the whole place is dirty. So they instituted a program known as a brigade, known as the Y Brigade, War Against Indiscipline. Soldiers were empowered to go into streets and ensure that Nigerians obey the laws of sanitation. They have to queue when they want to take buses, they want to use the bank, they want to buy anything. People must stay in queues. And then if you want to, during environmental sanitation, there are days set aside for environmental sanitation. Everyone must come outside. So when you empower people with discretionary power, especially people in military uniform, when they get to the field, they assume another kind of status and begin to oppress Nigerians. So the government at that time thought that Nigerians were actually dirty people. And so part of the agenda was to keep the country clean. And to do that, they have to force people to do that using the military and then white brigades. And during that period, it was a very traumatic period for Nigerians. It was good also, but it infringed on the fundamental rights of Nigerians. You don't, if you drop things indiscriminately, you are not only told to just pick it up, right? I think what the soldiers would have done, or the brigade, is to correct. But what they do is they torture people who infringe on the sanitary policies. People are told to drink water from the gutter. People are told to lie down in the gutters. People are being flogged for not keeping the environment clean. So it was until a new regime came and suspended that system. So, but if you go back a little further, I was going to talk about empowerment. You see, when you make the laws and then you empower people to execute the law, these people who are going to execute the law constitute themselves again into another form of demigods. In the colonial era, the colonial masters also empowered certain people called the Wole Wole in Lagos. These people were empowered to go and see to people's environment, to be sure people keep the environment clean. These people also became powerful too. And there was a local song about them that the sanitary officer is coming, is going to search your house, he's going to search my house. And from our investigation, these people receive bribes. They can put a false allegation against you, and then you are going to you'll be court-martialed. So Nigerians at that time were not well attuned to Western education, so they were ready to part with their money to just to prevent them from being arrested by these colonial sanitary representative officers. So it was, you see, after we talked to people, we discovered that the more you empower people to execute the law, these people also become powerful, take advantage of the people, and then misrepresent the law in itself. That was what transpired, transcended or metamorphosed, mutated into the military system also. And we also look at the cultural aspect of it too. You can be punished for being for coming from certain part of Nigeria. Lagos is a Yoruba enclave, the commercial center of Nigeria. And then those who come to Lagos, migrants from the eastern part of Lagos, who are basically business people and hardworking people, are treated differently. It is a general perception that these people come with debt to dirty Lagos, and Lagos is dirty because the migrants came with their dirty habits. And you see the they carry perception into neighborhoods of migrants and then begin to execute in very harsh way the government policies on waste management. It goes on and on, and it's a trickle effect. Thank you.
Thanks, John. No, it's really interesting. And one of the themes I want to pull out from everyone's talk is the idea of migrants are often the ones who are doing this labor in these different contexts, or migrants get sort of entwined with ideas of dirtiness and filth, or blamed for it. Joe, you haven't had it. Could you elaborate on that theme in your own work? You haven't had as many chances to answer questions.
Okay, yes. Migration absolutely features in my work. So in the early studies we did, it was rural-urban migration, and particularly in Faisalabad, which was an agricultural district with a city that served that agricultural district. A lot of the waste workers came from what in India would be understood as scheduled tribes, former agricultural workers, or nomadic populations. They came into the cities. And then, of course, in Karachi, where you had migrants from Gujarat coming in, and then a later wave of migrants from Afghanistan. But what's interesting, if you compare what we're doing in Ethiopia, where it's also people at the bottom of the heap, very similar to what Hari and Daniel have been talking about as well. It's not got that overlay of untouchability or social markers associated with ethnicity and religion. And it's that toxic mix of being at the bottom of the social hierarchy economically, and then in terms of these social markers, that is so difficult to shift.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting and good point. Sort of related to that, question from the Huva platform from Prashit. For Daniel, can you elaborate a little bit more on who the waste workers were involved in human waste collection? Was it also demarcated by race, class, and gender? I know you mentioned migrants, but can you elaborate on this a little?
Yes, it was indeed. And I love that question. Unfortunately, I don't have very solid data to back up my answer, but I have anecdotes from the stories and the histories that I've read. Most of the scavenger companies were owned and operated by immigrants as well. They were male, and they were paid a decent amount. I think the scavenger company owners did quite well, and the scavengers did okay too. It was, I saw advertisements in newspapers from back in the 1830s and 1840s, you know, promising really pretty good wages for the scavengers. On the other hand, this was, as in all cases, this is really, really difficult work. They worked at night. They were attacked and vulnerable because they worked at night. They were universally reviled by the citizens of New York and other cities as well, unfairly, I think, because they were normally reviled for the noise that they made and the smell that came from their work. It wasn't their smell, it was from the homeowners themselves. So yeah, it was the demography, I suppose, of these workers was male, immigrant, and relatively poor, but rising, I would say.
Migrants from where, Daniel?
All over. I know that there were some from Poland, from Ireland, from Italy, and those are the ones that I remember.
Okay. I would also just sort of note that it sounds like a lot of the immigrants you're talking about are those who would be coded as white today, although Italians are did not used to be coded white back then. European immigrants.
European immigrants, yeah, but you're right to note that. I mean, Italian and Irish immigrants were considered non-white at the time. So.
Okay. Looking through the questions from the audience. Let's see. There are some of them. Again, panelists, if you have questions for each other, please feel free to jump in. All right.
Jen, there was a question from Mariam at the beginning for John, asking, how do you think we can overcome the impact of the colonial period on countries like Nigeria?
John, did you get that?
Yes, okay, yes. Like I said, my studies actually looked very deeply into the impact of colonialism on Nigeria, especially when it has to do with waste management. The impact of colonialism is very deep, so that it haunts us till this day. When the colonial masters came, they introduced, we were told that the existing system of sewage management, for example, was very crude and barbaric. And there's a system, it's called Shalanga. Shalanga is a pit latrine where the natives, they dig the soil, make a very deep hole, cover with wood and everything, and they put it. Over years, it becomes manure. And when it is filled, they go elsewhere, dig somewhere else. So when the colonial masters came, they could not understand why Africans, Nigerians, were using that crude method. So they introduced a system known as bucket latrine. because they didn't have the privilege of digging. So what the colonial masters used was bucket latrine. And then to dispose this fecal waste, they employed the indigenous Nigerians, most of whom, like the earlier speaker said, were foreigners. The foreigners who were called Agbekos and Nigerians too. And then because they don't want to be identified as doing such job, they have to cover themselves up, and they come under the guise of darkness to carry the buckets and then to dispose. It became a general practice. It was enforced across the metropolis of Lagos. So people who were using shalanga, it became a crime to dig up pit latrine. So you have to resort to buckets. And then the night soilman comes at night to take it and dispose it. So it continued like that until this day. It's a thing of shame for to see people who want to actually be seen as doing that kind of job. But somehow people have started protesting by, you see, catchphrase like shit money does not smell. You see, they've developed a sewage management system, and then they're trying to be proud of it to encourage people to come into it. It's a way of fighting against those colonial markers. So I think for we to actually reduce the impact of colonialism has become a part of us. It has an unconscious, as we talk about the mental organon, the mental implication of colonialism on the average Nigerian or African is very deep. So it's not something that can go away so easily. Sometimes unknown to us, we are being entangled by colonialism. So to actually reduce it is to actually begin to reinvent our traditional system and then try to mechanize it. Because before the colonial, it was a truncation of an existing system. Perhaps if we were not intercepted or interrupted, we would probably have developed those traditional system of doing things into very mechanized system. So I think Africans should begin to look very deep into their traditional ways of doing things and perhaps create an hybrid form rather than just accepting that everything African is bad and everything European is good. And that's one way we can actually learn. Certain persons are beginning to explore those, and what was initially referred to as crude are beginning to make very legitimate claim to mainstream attention, like the sewage management itself. Persons have begun to say, okay, it is not a thing of shame because even the white man defecates. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, John. I think that is quite interesting, and it ties into a little bit. I think a lot of countries and a lot of places are looking back to historical or traditional methods of waste disposal or thinking about or handling waste. And it actually ties kind of nicely into Hari's question. Hari, do you want to just go ahead and ask it yourself?
Yeah, so the question is to other members who presented. So in the past, I heard that in most of the places, it's called night soil also, fecal matters. So in the past or at present, is there any place the fecal matter dried and then used as fertilizers or any other products or used for any other financial business purposes? So that's just a question outside the purview of the discussion. Yeah.
I'm going to let Daniel answer. I'm going to let the others answer this in a moment, but I'll also just say with, it was really common in London to use it for centuries and to use night soil and what came from the cesspits. But a lot of, and it was used for fertilizer in the farms, but a lot of that actually shifted away with the discovery of bat guano as an even more potent source of fertilizer and nitrates and phosphates. So it's really it was a really economic shift, but it used to be a very common usage for the shit of London. And then I'm guessing, Daniel, you're going to want to jump in on this?
Yeah, sure. For a while in the 19th century, for about 4 decades, actually, there was a company called Lodi Manufacturing, and they would take all of New York City's shit and dry it out and turn it into essentially shit bricks that they would sell to farmers as fertilizer. that went away, as Dr. Barr mentioned, with the introduction of guano. It came back though in the 1920s. Milwaukee, a city in the U.S., was one of the first cities to do this, to market their composted shit as a fertilizer. So it's called millorganite. It took a long time for the rest of the country to catch up. In the 1990s, Austin, Texas started selling Dillo dirt, which was, and it's important, I suppose, to distinguish between raw sewage, which was fairly common for centuries, and this new composted sewage that is the result of the shit that has made its way through the sewer system. And now we see most cities, I would say, in the United States applying fecal sludge to farms. They don't like to call it sludge. They have special euphemisms for it, but it's a problem. I mean, it's a really wonderful idea, and I love the recycling mentality of it. But unfortunately, they're able to treat the shit for the dangerous bacteria in it, so they make it safe from bacteria and viruses. But as it makes its way through the sewer system, the shit gets contaminated with medical waste, with industrial waste, and by the time it gets onto the farmland, it's mired in heavy metals and other pollutants, which that's our future. I don't know what our farms are going to look like in 20 years if we keep doing this, but I worry that it's going to be very, very dense and heavy and toxic metals.
John or Joe, did you want to also respond?
Yeah, okay. In Nigeria, during the colonial era, there was nothing particularly, okay, while in pre-colonial Nigeria, fecal waste are used as manure. But when the practice was banished by the colonial master, it was being dumped into the ocean. So there was nothing particularly of importance of fecal waste at the time. However, when it was time for Nigerians to begin to, certain Nigerians, in fact, high-profile socialites started going into shit business and trying to make it popular. A certain Otumba, a rich man, opened a company and said his goal is to collect this fecal waste and begin to use it as biofuel. So he set up a company, employed people, and then he created mobile toilets. So he modernized the Agbepo syndrome, a nice soilman syndrome system, into a modernized type. So he collects the fecal waste and started a process of converting the fecal materials into biofuel. I don't know the scientific procedure for that, but that was a system he set up in Lagos. A company he set up in Lagos before he passed. After his death, we don't know how far that come, but the dream was to begin to generate biofuel through fecal waste. So I think fecal waste can also be put into such use. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Joe, did you want to respond as well?
A couple of things. So one of the questions in the chat from Hari is whether fecal waste is used as a fertilizer or any other finished products. And in Faisalabad, it's very much used for fire. And it's animal waste from buffaloes, camels, and so on that's collected. So, but going back to the colonial question, I think it's interesting. The Punjabi Christians converted in Punjab in the late 19th century under British colonialism. And I think it's difficult to impute to colonial masters, as John calls them, whether they were doing this for welfare reasons or divide and rule reasons. But the effect was to create a path-dependent work track for those people that has lasted for well over a century. And I think the interesting part of looking at it in the long term is how those colonial motives, whatever they were, get intersected with what have become historical and political shifts that have led to very surprising reconstructions of social identity. So I think when we, and this is reinforcing John's point, I think that you can't just have a break with colonialism. It then gets reinvented and infused with what follows.
I think that, yeah, those are all excellent points. We have about 15 minutes left, so just being mindful of time and making sure we have a couple minutes to close out. I think if we could, sort of as a final wrap-up question, give you guys some time. I'd like to hear from each of the panelists about what idea, lesson, or lens or perspective would you like people who are working in this space currently to take with them from your work and from the historical perspectives? Daniel, do you want to start since you're on my right hand on my screen?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So after studying this for about 20 years or so, I've come to this conclusion that there's really nothing inevitable about the sanitation system in the US, as most US citizens think. We tend to believe that our system is the natural result of progress, that it's the best system, especially those who have traveled abroad, complain about toilets and waste management in other countries. But in reality, the way that we deal with shit is completely unsustainable. We've made mistake after mistake after mistake, and now we suffer from tremendous wastefulness. We flush trillions of gallons of drinking water down the toilet every year, and that is not okay. And it's not sustainable. Each year we're retrofitting our sewers to the separate system, as George Waring had suggested at the beginning. We're also dumping our sludge in areas populated by the poor and minorities. Much of that's in South Texas. And like I mentioned, we're applying sludge full of heavy metals to farmland. So I guess my one big takeaway from this is that in my own opinion, the future of sanitation and sewerage is not here. It's not in the US. I would say look elsewhere. Look to Africa, look to Madagascar, where Luwat is working, or to Kenya, where Sanitary is working. Look to Haiti, where a wonderful organization called Soil Haiti is retrieving and composting shit and using it for urban gardens. I think that the off-grid system is really the future, not ours.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to take, since you gave a shout out to Africa, I'm going to turn to John. John, same question.
Well, I want to say that while I appreciate the fact that he said that the future of sanitation is in Africa, I'd love to say probably elsewhere in Africa, not the part of Africa where I come from, because Nigeria is a country that is dependent on oil, the crude oil, and so there's a lot of pretension from the side of government and its officials on policies relating to sewage management. They oftentimes, what we see is lip services being paid. They come up with all kinds of policies that are going to do this, but these policies have never been sustained. Unsustainable policy. Unsustainable because most times these policies are shrouded in hypocrisy, and they are not able to make very sincere policies. It's based on perception. It's influenced by perception. So until we begin to look at sewage management in terms of the practicalities, and by practicalities I mean begin to seal up the sewage management industry system into a very big industry to know that we can actually generate income. We can diversify the economy. So once we're able to do that, then we can begin to put in place the right policies, and we don't bring policies that will come down crashing. Because oftentimes most of these policies on sewage management comes back and crashing. So that those who are actually sewage managers, successful sewage managers in Nigeria have been private individuals, And of course, the government will have to regulate this. And then for you to get the right regulation from government agencies, you have to give kickbacks and everything. So corruption comes in again. So it's a problem for us in Nigeria. Individuals cannot successfully do their business easily with sincerity. And when it is compromised, you see, the people will now start to pay for it. So perception, ethnicity, religion, and all of these things come to play to determine the kind of sewage management policy we have. It is that extent that I talk about the politics of sewage management in Nigeria. So until we rise above those sentiments, we will continue to go in circles. The future of sewage management, therefore, may lie in Kenya and elsewhere, but certainly not Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Hari?
Yeah. So along with all my questions in this program, so I was asking about how reconfiguring it as a valuable product. So there is a lot of issues in India, which is a part of social caste-based situation, and not only in India, other places also, like in Pakistan or anywhere. So migrants are forced to work. So all who are marginalized sections of the society are forced to work for this. So when the vacuum suckers, when there was a higher money paid for these jobs, these emergency jobs, many people across different caste, class, religion came in for this work. So when we promote it as a business strategy, when we promote it as so we know that everything is determined by this globalized world, which is of capitalism and other things. So when we make it as a product only, I think fecal waste, sanitation work and workers also will come out of this social exclusion and other caste-based occupation issues in India and in global South, I believe. So what my thinking is that for prioritization of fecal waste management or sanitation work by the local bodies and the state central governments, we need to actually understand that this is something valuable. This is also something emergency that we need to look at. And this is without cleaning the septage tank. Nobody can live more than 2 or 3 days. You'll be always in a hurry to dispose this waste and make your house and neighboring areas free, clean. So the proper management and making it into a valuable product, and because unless it is made into a valuable product, the government will lose a lot of money, and they will not go for prioritizing it over the other issues. So I think this political economy of this fecal waste, we need to map, and then we need to there should be agenda set, or what you say, we need to prioritize it. The workers and these kind of conferences, platforms should prioritize and promote this idea of making a value chain or a circular economy in that line. Yeah, thank you.
My sincere apologies. My computer ran out of batteries and shut down without telling me. I believe it's Joe's turn.
Thanks, Jen, and sympathies on the technological front. I think, to answer your question, what I'd like people to take away is there's something in the title, which I said, plus ça change, plus la même chose. And for our French audience, apologies for the accent, but the more things change, the more things stay the same. So that idea that path dependency is not necessarily inevitable, but it does constitute a social drag. So that's the kind of realism that a historical perspective brings. But I want to also offer a hopeful one, because path dependency isn't inevitable. We are seeing change. We're seeing particular change in the city of Karachi, which is huge, which is vibrant, where economic opportunities that don't fall within any caste or social hierarchy system are presenting themselves. There are organizations, one of which is following us on Twitter at the moment, called Sweepers Are Heroes. Fantastic organizational turbulence that is challenging views. There are practices that, are possible to challenge. Why do you give your traditional municipal sweeper or equivalent separate utensils? There's kind of the media can engage in those kinds of questions. But I think the last thing I would say is that change has to be both top down and bottom up. And when they meet in the middle, that's when you're likely to see movement. You can't leave it to sanitation workers on their own to change their own future. In Pakistan, Punjabi Christians are 1.5% of the population and politically vulnerable. Excuse the background noise. It's probably time for me to stop.
Sounded like you had a leaf blower in your office. Thank you so much, everyone, for your final wrap-ups and your final questions. My apologies to the people attending if we did not get to your question. I believe you would be welcome to reach out to any of the panelists should you wish to continue those conversations. We are out of time, but thank you all so much for joining us on this panel. Thank you, Alex, for being our support and backup person. And I hope you will join us for future sessions. Thank you all so much.
Thank